For the past half hour, he had been observing his attractive wife as she, story 1006, navigated her way through the ballroom. Her intention was to position herself as far away from her husband as possible. 012. When the ball dropped at midnight, she was surrounded by well-off and self-satisfied peers acting like an 018 elaborate dish served for everyone's attention. Executives from his workplace would kiss and touch her, particularly 025. His obnoxious boss, who had been born wealthy, he was well aware of this routine as his 030 companies. New Year's Eve parties had followed the same pattern for the past 2 years. During the first year, he had tolerated 036, chalking it up to the effects of too much champagne. However, last year, the reality hit him 042 hard, and he started making preparations to address the situation. Feeling a tug on his coat, he turned 048 around to face Natalie, closest friend and co-conspirator. Happy New Year, Richard. She exclaimed, reaching up 055 to give him a somewhat pitiful kiss, an annual gesture. Their lips barely grazed before he pulled away and looked into 101, her brown eyes. Natalie was another socialite coming from a wealthier family than Emily, and just like his wife, 108, she was part of the upper echelon. Normally, he expected to see her usual self-assured smirk, implying that she, 115, held some secret knowledge he didn't possess due to her high social status. But this time he saw two new emotions on 122. Her face, pity and concern. Richard, don't take this so seriously, she, 128, said soothingly. She's just engaging in the custom of exchanging kisses on New Year's. She'll come back to you shortly, 134, without any harm done. She'll remind you how much she loves you. He gave her a doubtful look, 140. Natalie attempted to offer him reassurance. She truly loves you. You know, it's just that she's very outgoing. 147, lively and impulsive, whereas you tend to be more intellectual and reserved. 152. Sometimes she needs a chance to be around people who share her nature. However, being with them only reinforces 158 her love for you. All right. Natalie, is that why she spent the entire Christmas party hanging out with her co-workers under 205, the mistletoe? We attend her Christmas party, and she spends the night dancing and being affectionate with her colleagues. Then 212 here at my company's New Year's Eve event. She spends the whole night dancing and kissing, though not with my firm's 218 executives. So by being intimate with everyone at the party except me, she's supposed to 224 somehow gain a new appreciation for me. It's an interesting theory. Tell me, Natalie, is it her yearly tradition to shower Simon the idiot with a dozen kisses, or is this her twisted way of showing her love for me by doing something she knows I absolutely hate? I'll give it to Natalie. She actually managed to look embarrassed. She couldn't even look me in the eye, and instead glanced away, trying to carry on. Richard, I know you're upset, but you need to try to see things from her point of view, she pleaded. Do I, Natalie? Funny thing is, I think I finally do, maybe for the first time in our 5-year marriage. I turned my back on her, walked back to our table, and reached into a briefcase I'd stashed there earlier. Inside was a large, brightly wrapped gift. I took off my wedding ring, placed it right in the middle of the bow, ensuring she'd have to remove it to open the present. Facing Natalie, I held out the package. I'm leaving now. Do me a favor and give this to your friend when she can finally tear herself away from the crowd. Let her know I wish her a happy new year and hope she finds everything she deserves in the coming year. I started to walk away, but Natalie grabbed my arm. Don't go, Richard, I'll go get her. She's just had too much champagne again. You need to take her home. No, Natalie, I don't. She's got a room reserved here at the hotel. She's been here all day, playing hostess to the men while I've been working. You know that, of course, since you've been right by her side. She's got her own car, her clothes, and everything she needs. I'm sure at least one of the guys she's with right now would be more than happy to take care of her, or maybe they all will. I couldn't help but add, don't give me that look. You fed me the same excuse last year when I foolishly gave her another chance. She's made her decision, and now I've made mine. Goodbye, Natalie. I have to admit, it'll be a relief not having to see you again. As I walked out of the ballroom, I gave a nod to Patricia, the HR director. I'd spent the first half of the day with her while my boss and his cronies were busy setting things up at the hotel. Or to be more accurate, while they were pretending to set things up. My boss was actually holed up in a fancy suite, paid for with the company credit card, getting cozy with my wife. Actually, that's not quite right. They were fully sleeping together in that luxury suite. My wife and I have the photos and videos to prove it. Patricia has copies of this evidence too, and it won't be long before the chairman of the board gets his hands on it. After I left the ballroom, I saw Patricia and her husband make their way toward the group of men surrounding Emily. Natalie was also pushing through that group, dodging the persistent attempts from some men to kiss her as part of the New Year's tradition. A few guys tried their luck with Patricia, but her husband's disapproving glare, a former American soccer player, quickly made them think twice. Patricia kept going until she reached CEO Simon Clark and his companion, who were just ahead of Natalie. She stopped a few feet away, standing with her husband, and they both watched Natalie's confused expression. Suddenly, someone called out Natalie's name sharply, and the sound caught Emily's attention, pulling her away from Simon's embrace. Emily, seeing her friend's surprised look, frowned, while Patricia allowed herself a small smile. Natalie held out a beautifully wrapped gift and said something to Emily, who took the package from her. Emily leaned in, seemingly asking Natalie to repeat what she'd just said. "Richard left this for you." "He's gone, Emily," Natalie told her. "He watched you flirting and making out all night, and when you started getting handsy with those men, he handed me that package and walked out." Emily smirked, unfazed. "Oh, you know Richard. He gets all bent out of shape when I don't shower him with attention for a bit. I'll go home, say I'm sorry, give him a good time in bed, and everything will be back to normal. He loves me. Even when he's mad, he still left me a gift. Let's see what it is." Natalie tried to stop her. "Emily, I don't think it's a present," she cautioned, but Emily was already undoing the ribbon, eager to see what was inside. As the ring tumbled out and hit the floor, a moment of silence hung in the air. Emily looked puzzled, her brow furrowed. "What's this?" she asked, confusion clear in her voice. Simon, who had been watching the whole scene unfold, bent down, picked up the ring, and handed it to her with a smirk. "Isn't that your husband's wedding ring?" Emily froze, mid-unwrapping, staring at him in bewilderment before taking the ring. She glanced at Natalie, who quietly muttered, "I tried to tell you." Ignoring the unease creeping up her spine, Emily resumed tearing off the wrapping paper, revealing a white gift box underneath. Feeling a wave of relief, she smiled, gave the box a little shake, commented on its weight, and began carefully peeling off the tape with her fingernail. But as the tape on the third side came off, the box's contents spilled out, scattering across the floor. She immediately crouched down, trying to gather up the glossy sheets that had slipped away, with others around her bending down to help. Suddenly, everyone froze in place. Emily's eyes went wide and she screamed, "No!" Her cry drew the attention of those nearby, and more people began to gather around. Natalie's eyes widened in disbelief as well. She glanced up to see the horror etched on Simon's face as he picked up a large, glossy color photograph, about the size of a magazine cover, from the floor. Holding it against his expensive suit, he involuntarily yelled, "What the heck, Emily?" He said it loud enough for everyone in the vicinity to hear, and soon, all eyes were on the scattered photographs. The images showed Emily in compromising positions, engaged in sexual acts with people who were clearly not her husband. There were numerous shots of Emily with Simon, as well as with other executives from the company where both she and Richard worked, including her colleagues and bosses. While the photos didn't capture every possible angle, Richard had made sure to include ones that left no doubt about Emily's activities, showing her with both men and women in various combinations and numbers. Faced with these explicit photos of her infidelity, Emily's body couldn't handle the shock. She fainted, collapsing backward. Simon's shoe inadvertently cushioned her fall, preventing her head from slamming against the tile floor and possibly causing a concussion. Natalie knelt beside her, gently lifting Emily's head, lightly slapping her face and urgently shouting, "Emily, Emily, are you okay? Talk to me, Emily." As the two women lay there on the floor, the others around them began picking up the photos, examining them with a mix of disbelief and judgment. A woman, enraged, turned and slapped her husband with all the strength she could muster, just as he was examining one of the photos. "You're a cheater!" she yelled. "No wonder you don't have the energy to satisfy me." Her husband stared at her in stunned silence, but before he could respond, she swung her purse, landing a solid hit on his right eye. He winced in pain, but it didn't end there. She followed up with a sharp kick to his groin, making him crumble to the floor. Not content with that, she knelt down and began sifting through the scattered pictures with cold determination. She paused, then looked up and declared, "You ladies married to the big shots at Walsh, and son might want to take a look at these photos. Some of your husbands are in here too. If you're interested in saving on divorce attorneys, give me a call. We could probably get a group rate. 9 other women quickly joined her on the floor, examining the photos with a mix of fury and heartbreak. The men, realizing the tide had turned, started backing away. There are flash drives here too, one of the women announced loudly, holding one up for all to see. Who knows what's on them? Another woman, her face twisted with rage, turned on a well-dressed older man and shouted, "You dirty cheater! Remember our prenup? You're financially ruined, you jerk!" The man tried to stammer out an excuse, pleading, "Baby, I'm sorry. It didn't mean anything. She kept coming on to me, and I eventually gave in. But it was only once, and she wasn't as good as you anyway." "You're a lying liar!" the blonde woman screamed back, holding up 2 more damning photos. She stood up from the floor, her eyes blazing with fury, and confronted him, waving the pictures in his face while unleashing a torrent of curses. The man, realizing he was cornered, stepped back, then turned and bolted from the scene. Meanwhile, another woman was sobbing uncontrollably, clutching her chest with one hand and a photograph with the other. Her husband, his face buried in his hands, was also crying, overwhelmed by the chaos around them. One of the men, unable to contain his frustration, held up a photo and shouted at the attractive woman standing in front of him. "So you're bisexual? What the heck is this? You kept telling me there'd never be a threesome because you wouldn't be with another woman." She blushed deeply, spun around, and awkwardly hurried away, struggling to maintain her balance in those sky-high 10-inch heels. Another woman, determined, selected a handful of photos from the pile and began calling out names as she made her way toward the center of the ballroom. One puzzled woman stopped her in her tracks, picked up a photo, and then turned to her husband with a look of pure fury. He instinctively started backing away, but she quickly closed the gap, brandishing the incriminating photograph in his face. This scene played out 5 more times, with each new victim being assaulted by their friends' accusatory glares and ears ringing with whispered accusations. Emily, who had been knocked out of her daze by now, was sitting up, her eyes wide as she took in the chaos swirling around her. A man in a sharp tuxedo knelt down beside her and asked, "Are you all right?" She looked at him, her expression one of bewildered curiosity, and nodded slightly. "Who are you?" he pressed. "Can I help you?" She responded solemnly, "I'm Emily Harper, but I don't think there's anyone who can help me now." "Wait, are you the Emily Harper?" he asked, his disbelief evident. She nodded again and asked, "Yes, I am. And who might you be?" Without a word, the man handed her a stack of papers he had been holding, snapped a quick photo of her with his phone, and then announced loudly for all to hear, "I am the bailiff. You've just been served, Emily Harper." He continued, addressing the now silent crowd. "These documents, along with the accompanying photos and videos, serve as evidence of the infidelity claimed in Richard Harper's divorce petition." Turning to the crowd, he added, "Ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't had the chance to see the photos, you can request a copy of the divorce papers. They're public records, accessible online. The papers list the names of all individuals Emily has been involved with over the past year, along with dates and locations." He paused for effect before concluding, "For a small fee, I can provide a link to Emily's website, which gives a comprehensive account of her activities since January 1st of last year. If you're interested in reviewing this evidence to see if your spouse might have been involved in intimate relations with Emily and others, you can contact me through our site at cheatingspousepi.com," he continued. "For an additional fee, I'll provide a link to our site where you can obtain digital copies of all the participants' actions. This evidence could be crucial in court." He concluded with a deep bow before walking away, leaving behind a scene filled with tears, fear, and panic. Although he might face consequences for his actions in the future, he was well compensated for his work. Plus, being based in New York and having his office in New Jersey, where his influential family had significant connections, gave him a sense of security. Emily, still clutching the divorce papers in her lap, leaned heavily against Natalie, her mouth agape in bewilderment. As she scanned the faces surrounding her, she saw only a mix of hatred, pity, anger, and unease, an unsettling change from the usual blend of admiration, desire, and jealousy she had basked in throughout her privileged life. The stark realization of her loss and the deep shame that came with it crashed over her, and she clung to Natalie, burying her face in her friend's chest, sobbing uncontrollably. Meanwhile, Simon Walsh was barking orders to his subordinates, instructing them to gather all the incriminating photos and destroy them. His gaze landed on Patricia, and with cold authority, he commanded, "I want a reprimand letter for Richard Harper on my desk by Monday, along with his termination papers." Patricia responded with a composed expression, "I'm sorry, Mr. Walsh, but Mr. Harper resigned earlier this afternoon. He gave 2 weeks' notice, used the vacation time you approved last week, packed up all his things, and left the building." Mr. Walsh's eyes narrowed, his voice firm as he replied, "I don't care. I won't accept his resignation. I'll fire him myself, and I'll make sure he never works in this industry again." But Patricia wasn't done. "I apologize once more, Mr. Walsh," she continued, but before he left, he spoke directly with the chairman of the board. "Your father approved his resignation," Patricia stated calmly. "Mr. Harper has already secured a new position with a firm he consulted for previously, with your written approval, sir." Simon Walsh's face turned a deep shade of red, so much so that those around him began to worry he might have a stroke. He fumed, swearing under his breath at both his father and Richard Harper. The scene wasn't lost on Patricia and her husband, who found the situation rather amusing, though they kept their expressions neutral, holding hands as they silently reveled in Walsh's humiliation. Meanwhile, Richard Harper was driving away from New York in his brand-new, fully loaded Chevy High Country Suburban, equipped with a powerful turbo diesel engine he had specially ordered. He had chosen this particular SUV back in the fall, when the new models first became available, and had just received it the day before. According to his GPS, the journey to his new home in Austin, Texas, would take approximately 24 hours and 32 minutes along the route he'd mapped out. But Richard knew it would likely take him closer to a week because he intended to savor the experience, immersing himself in the culture of the rural states he'd passed through. When he reached Virginia, he planned to veer off the main highways and take the scenic country roads immortalized in John Denver's songs. He was eager to explore the small towns in the Carolinas that Mary Chapin Carpenter had sung about, sampling the local homemade jellies and jams sold at quaint roadside stores. His plan was to eat at local diners away from the busy highways and far from the fast-paced lifestyle he had grown weary of. Financially, Richard and his wife had always maintained separate checking and savings accounts, but that arrangement shifted slightly after he purchased the SUV. Given that she had earned 10 times more than him throughout their marriage, buying an $88,000 vehicle hardly leveled the playing field. Still, he was content using some of her money for the purchase. Under the terms of his proposal, he would retain his investments and retirement funds, and she would keep hers. If she agreed to his generous terms and signed the divorce papers within 10 days, he wouldn't make any claims on her penthouse or trust fund. The car's radio was tuned to Sirius XM's The Roadhouse, which played the best classic country music. Emily, however, wasn't a fan of country music any more than he was of retro tunes, so he switched to the classic vinyl station instead. He felt a newfound sense of independence. No longer was he the uninformed husband that she had made him out to be over the past couple of years. When the New Year's ball dropped last year, he had taken charge of his life, spending the entire year realigning his priorities. Although Walsh & Son, the company he had once worked for, might survive his departure, he was doubtful it would thrive under Simon's inept leadership. Without the design innovations and patents he had contributed over the last 5 years, he expected the company to collapse within a year or two. The thought gave him a sense of satisfaction, knowing his efforts had significantly boosted their sales and profits over the past year. He had top-notch designs and improvements ready to roll out as soon as his new company was up and running. His former boss, now the head of the board, Leonard Walsh, would likely sell the company before its failure became apparent. Meanwhile, Simon would be exposed as the inept fraud he truly was, and the thought of that delighted him. Tonight, he had successfully portrayed both Simon and his unfaithful wife as morally bankrupt individuals. In the coming year, when his new company outperformed his old one, he planned to expose Simon's lack of business acumen, much like crushing a bug on a windshield. The idea of this brought a satisfied smile to his face. He was also content to remain a passive observer as Emily's parents discovered the truth about his actions at the ball. Patricia had already called him with news of the favorable outcome. The fact that she had spread the photos throughout the ballroom was even better than he had anticipated. Although he had intentionally designed the box to fall apart when the film was cut on 3 sides, the impact was greater than he had hoped. Emily's parents had always looked down on him, disappointed that their precious daughter had married someone they deemed unworthy, especially given his lack of an Ivy League education. The reality that his engineering degree from the Colorado School of Mines and his master's degree from the University of Michigan made him highly sought after in his field mattered far more to him than an arts degree from Brown University. As he thought about the chaos he had caused and the accomplishments he planned for the future, a smile spread across his face. Natalie and her husband Frank drove Emily back home. As soon as they entered the house, Emily took a look around and began to cry once more. During the ride, she had rehearsed what she would say to Richard. She wanted to make it clear that her affairs were inconsequential and not damaging to their marriage. She hoped to explain that these encounters were merely breaks or attempts to influence decisions that affected both of them, aimed at improving their lives. She tried to convince herself that these casual encounters actually benefited them. They helped her manage her intense sexual desire and provided her with new experiences to please Richard and add variety to their intimate life. The excuses sounded ridiculous even to her, and she knew Richard would never buy into them. The truth was, he was deeply committed to their marriage vows. Discussions about swapping partners or engaging in role play with others angered him. Why, then, did she think he would accept her feeble justifications? Deep down, she understood that her marriage was unraveling. But when she entered their apartment and saw that all of Richard's belongings were gone, it hit her that she had dug a pit for herself. Overcome with bitterness and self-blame, she collapsed on the floor, crying uncontrollably. She had never anticipated getting caught, and had believed that if she did, she could persuade her kind and innocent husband to forgive her. For 3 years, she had successfully hidden her actions, but tonight, Richard had dismantled both their marriage and her reputation completely. The week flew by for Richard. He copied his SIM card before discarding the old one in the slushy city snow. This way he could stay in touch without interruptions while traveling through the Old South on his way to his new home in Texas. Throughout the week, Richard sent out his custom emails. Each spouse received a personalized message with an attachment that led to the unraveling of one marriage after another. The thought of this outcome made Richard grin with satisfaction. Just yesterday, he had sent a similar letter to Natalie's husband, Frank. Richard relished the idea of how Al might react. Though Emily was responsible for her own actions, it was Natalie's account of the pleasure she took in her affairs, along with her friend's encouragement to be promiscuous, that had truly influenced Emily's decisions. On the 4th day back in New York, Natalie and Emily sat on the couch in their apartment, now just their apartment, as Frank had kicked Natalie out after receiving an email containing a video. The video featured snippets of sexual activities and a revealing conversation between Emily and Natalie. In it, they recounted their conquests and pleasures, listing the names of their lovers and even laughing about their unsuspecting husbands. Frank had forwarded this video to the wives of the women mentioned, especially if he knew them, which was often the case. The chaos spread, and Frank took satisfaction in watching it unfold. Simon wasn't faring any better. His father had fired him and cut him off from his inheritance. In fact, his father had also dismissed all the top executives responsible for the company's tarnished reputation due to their actions. His father was now acting as CEO, while Patricia, the new vice president of talent development and attraction, was busy recruiting skilled executives from around the globe. As Richard drove past, he bypassed the Martin Luther King Boulevard exit and prepared to turn onto Cesar Chavez Street. He drove by the Austin Convention Center and noticed Lady Bird Lake on his left. After crossing Congress Avenue, he parked at the exclusive high-rise apartment arranged by his new company. He had paid 6 months' rent in advance for the 73rd-floor apartment, which offered a stunning view of the city. This gave Richard ample time to find the house he had always dreamed of, one with trees and a lawn. Once he was settled, he planned to get a dog and start searching for a reliable partner who would enjoy building a life with him and their future children. His new business partners had already arranged a barbecue event to introduce him as recently divorced, ensuring there would be no shortage of eligible women. Back in New York City, the drama continued to unfold as exposed spouses implicated others and abusive partners shared information about their counterparts. Patricia kept Richard informed about the spreading chaos. The more Richard heard about the turmoil he had set in motion, the more satisfied he felt. His excitement about his move to Texas grew with each update, and he thought about it with a sense of finality, repeatedly telling himself, "Gone to Texas." Story 2. My wife is a staunch advocate of feminism and values her independence deeply. This has had a significant impact on our married life, making it feel more like two separate individuals cohabitating rather than a traditional married couple. She dedicates a considerable portion of her time to her career and personal projects, both at work and around the house. As a result, our dynamic often feels more like that of roommates than a typical married pair. I'm a 35-year-old man who married a software developer 2 years ago. My job in accounting doesn't demand as much of my time and effort as hers does. She's driven by a strong desire to prove herself and earn more than I do, which leads her to take on numerous projects. After we got married, she began to see household chores as a matter of pride, expecting me to take on most of the domestic duties because of her work commitments. My wife is frequently away from home during dinner hours, either eating at work or ordering food online. Because of this, we mostly spend time together on weekends. She deliberately distances herself from her married cousins and friends who have taken on traditional roles as homemakers and mothers. She places a higher value on her independent lifestyle. At social gatherings, she often makes negative remarks about housewives, referring to them as if they were servants. I've tried to talk to her openly, urging her not to mock women who choose different life paths, yet she remains steadfast in her belief that a career is essential, viewing it as a sign of success. She takes immense pride in her job, sometimes to the point where it seems like arrogance, which frustrates me. Despite this, she does treat me well and shows me kindness almost every day. She expresses her love through thoughtful gifts and affectionate texts, filled with "I love you" and "I miss you." Her care and consideration are impressive, and I've been satisfied with our romantic life. In the bedroom, she takes charge to ensure my happiness. Recently, one of her cousins came to visit, marking the first time they'd seen each other since childhood. We decided to host a dinner to foster a warm family atmosphere. My wife had certain expectations about her cousin, assuming she'd be a stay-at-home mom or struggling with her career. To her surprise, her cousin had become a successful dentist with a stable income. This unexpected news wounded my wife's pride, since she was accustomed to boasting about her own accomplishments. She couldn't help but feel envious of anyone who had achieved greater success. Determined to outshine her accomplished cousin, my wife took on an extra job on weekends, aiming to achieve greater success and wealth for our family. Consequently, we ended up spending less time together. One of her colleagues, David, frequently came over to work on coding and programming tasks. They were deeply involved in important personal projects and were planning to launch them soon. Given the considerable age difference between David, my wife, and me, I never felt threatened by his presence in our home. In fact, David and I would often play games together during their breaks, and he would even cook delicious meals for us. Unlike me, David, who was in his 20s, wasn't weighed down by marriage or extensive responsibilities. He was completely focused on their project and work. It was evident that he was actively dating, frequently changing girlfriends, and exploring various relationships. My wife and I, with our own relationship experiences, often found ourselves giving David advice on his romantic pursuits. On nights when they had to work late, David would stay over in our guest room. Eventually, my wife decided to leave her full-time job to fully dedicate herself to the ambitious project she was working on with David. They both poured their hearts into their work, striving tirelessly to turn their vision into reality. As someone who values hard work, I fully supported my wife and David in their efforts. My wife had a strict approach to their work. If David ever appeared lazy, she would express her displeasure openly and make a fuss about it. She insisted that this project was her most significant achievement and demanded perfection, with no tolerance for mistakes or shortcuts. To maintain peace and prevent David from feeling intimidated or leaving, I often found myself mediating between them during their disagreements. Knowing my wife's tendency to get angry, I would take David's side to help calm her down. It was crucial to me that their collaboration continued smoothly, especially when we were with friends and family. My wife took immense pride in her new projects and loved to flaunt her achievements. However, her excessive pride and arrogance eventually led to our old friends and family gradually excluding us from events and gatherings. In response to this, David took the initiative to organize small picnics and even treated us to concert tickets, giving us a chance to unwind from our hectic work schedules. With our social circle shrinking to just me, my wife, David, and whichever woman David was dating at the time, we found joy in each other's company. My wife constantly felt the need to compete with David's girlfriends, believing her unique mix of beauty and intelligence made her superior. She seized every opportunity to highlight her qualities. I often felt exasperated by my wife's self-centered behavior. During a major argument between us, David stepped in to help smooth things over and mend our relationship. Over time, David became like a younger brother to me, and I had complete trust in him. I even offered him the option to move in with us, but he politely declined, recognizing that we needed some space. He was already spending most of his days and nights at our place, and with their project nearing completion, their hard work was beginning to pay off. They worked relentlessly on their laptops, coding and programming day and night, taking on more tasks as the pressure mounted. As the stress increased, my wife's irritability grew worse. She often took out her frustration on David, yelling and venting her anger at him. Surprisingly, she never voiced any complaints to me about her workload. Meanwhile, David had to manage his own significant workload while also dealing with her bad moods. Seeing this, I couldn't help but feel sympathy for him as he faced the challenges of the project while coping with my wife's unpredictable temper. One evening, I ended up attending my company's annual dinner alone since my wife was caught up with work. While I was preparing for the event, David, who was also busy with their project, kept making comments about my tie choices. After some back and forth, I settled on a red tie and bid David goodbye. When I arrived at the dinner venue, I noticed that everyone else was wearing blue or gray ties, which contrasted sharply with my red one. To my surprise, I learned that the tie color was part of a planned theme discussed in a WhatsApp group that I had missed. As I looked at my red tie, debating whether to change it, I started to feel bored. The event hadn't started yet, and there was still some time before dinner, so I decided to head back home to switch my tie. I was curious about David's reaction and thought it would be fun to surprise him with a different tie. When I got back and unlocked the door, I was stunned to find the room where David and my wife had been working was empty. They were nowhere in sight. I guessed that they might have had an argument, with David leaving and my wife going to our bedroom. With that thought in mind, I went to our bedroom to change my tie, only to be completely shocked by what I found. I was horrified to discover David and my wife in a highly intimate situation on our bed, completely naked. What I saw was far beyond anything I could have imagined and deeply disturbing. Both David and my wife were taken aback and horrified when they saw me unexpectedly entering the house. They had mistakenly assumed I would be away for several more hours, and took advantage of that. A surge of anger and despair overwhelmed me, causing my temples to throb with the rush of blood. Ignoring them completely, I headed straight for the room where they used to work together. My intentions were clouded by intense emotions, fueled by rage. I quickly located their laptops, and before they could react, I forcefully threw them against the wall. The laptops, containing years of their hard work, shattered on impact. I then deliberately carried the broken laptops outside, ensuring they couldn't be salvaged or repaired. Fortunately, their USB drives were still connected to the laptops at that moment, so they had no way to recover or save their crucial data. In their state of desperation, they begged me to stop, their uncontrollable sobs revealing how devastated they were by the loss of their work. My wife tried to explain that their actions were driven by exhaustion and stress from work, but instead of soothing my anger, her words only fueled it further. Overwhelmed by shock and feelings of betrayal, I made the difficult decision to force both my wife and David to leave our home. Despite the fact that my wife had always treated David like a younger brother, and there had been no prior indications of anything inappropriate, the discovery of their intimate connection deepened my sense of pain and betrayal. I never imagined something like this could happen to me. I informed everyone about my wife's actions, which greatly distressed her. She had always been concerned about her image among her peers, and the fallout from this incident pushed her into a state of depression. The project she had invested years into was destroyed, and her professional partnership with David came to a sudden end. She's now relying on medication to manage her mental health and is struggling to complete her work due to her unstable condition. Her workload has significantly decreased, and she's unable to maintain a full-time job. In an email, she expressed her deep apologies, feeling a tremendous sense of guilt over the failure of her dream project and believing she's entirely to blame, which is partly true. However, when I served her with divorce papers, she didn't handle it well. She's finding it very difficult to cope with the failure in her career, marriage, and other aspects of her life, which makes it hard for her to move forward. The setbacks she's faced have stripped her of her pride. Some might argue that pride's danger lies in its ability to lead to one's downfall. Persistent arrogance can hinder a person's ability to connect with a higher power or understand spirituality. When consumed by pride, individuals often develop a condescending attitude that limits their perspective and ability to empathize with others. As for my decision to divorce and move on, I find comfort in that choice. Both my ex-spouse and old friends are now reaching out, offering their support. They have come to recognize the hurtful behavior my wife displayed toward them, which had led to our exclusion from their gatherings. Since separating from my wife, I've regained the support of my friends. Engaging in activities like camping and hunting has revitalized my spirit and lifted the depression I once felt. My wife used to foster competition between me and my friends, but now I'm free from that mindset. I no longer feel the need to pursue wealth just to outshine or dominate others. Thank you for listening to the entire story. If you enjoyed it, please show your support with a like and consider subscribing to our channel. Leave your thoughts in the comments about what you think of the story.